Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo encounter stories. First story. I saw the Wendigo when I was 12. This story was shared on r/no sleep. I was about 12 years old when I saw a creature I never expected to be biologically possible. Before I start recalling this horrifying memory, I have to explain what I think I saw, by telling a description of something really similar to it. The Wendigo is a creature from Native American folklore, usually resembling either a human with pointed teeth and dried blood covering its body or a humanoid animal-like spirit with a deer skull-like head. It feeds on humans, due to it being a cannibal spirit. In 1659, there were reports of a humanoid creature, with a skull-like head, killing some of the people who originally founded America in the city of what is now New York. It eventually left, and what remained was an absolute bloodbath. The town I live in refuses to talk about this occurrence, and most have forgotten about it, but not me. Anyway, I'll get on with the story. I was walking home with my parents after a long day at the zoo. It was midwinter, so there was heavy snow all over the ground. I saw large footprints in the snow, shaped like those of a large bird. The only difference was, the left toe was lifted off of the ground. I pointed this out to my parents, but they said it was probably just someone in a dinosaur costume having a prank. A snowstorm broke out 20 minutes after we set out, and I said to my parents we should be moving, this could be dangerous. My parents agreed, and we took shelter in a subway. My dad eventually went out to see if it was safe. We heard a low, reptilian growl, then the sound of bone snapping. We ran further down the subway, got into the train and jumped out at the next station, which was very near our house. We shut the door, locked it, and I went straight into my bedroom. I shut the door, and just in case I closed the blinds and barricaded the door. Only something supernaturally strong could push that, right? I was terribly wrong when I thought that. I heard the front door smashing open, and my mother screaming. Whatever just attacked my mom pushed my door open with ease. I then realized I had made a stupid mistake. I had only used light objects to barricade the door. The creature in front of me had armor on its head resembling a deer skull, with a crack on its snout. Its yellow eyes with slit pupils stared at me, and I stared back. Its fur was stained with blood, and I saw it holding an arm I recognized as my own father's. The creature's gray figure began to move towards me. Without thinking, I grabbed a box and threw it at the creature. It fell backwards, and I realized I had the upper hand. I took the curtain rail off the wall and charged at the creature. I kicked the box onto its head, disorientating it temporarily. When it regained full control of its body, I had already thrust the rail into its underbelly. The creature growled in anger, but eventually went into what appeared to be a permanent state of unconsciousness. I ran downstairs to check my mom. I was relieved when she turned out to be okay. We both went upstairs to check the creature, but it had vanished. Second story. This story was shared by u/RJ_Lewis_Hines, so credits to him. Wendigo psychosis. You know, it is really easy to lose yourself up here. The thought comforts me somewhat, although I'm not sure why, as the commonness of my situation does nothing to change the exigency of it. I suppose it is my fault. I knew the four-wheeler was low on gas when I left the cabin, and I would only have just enough to reach the lake house, but I couldn't help myself when I saw a path I hadn't been down before. It snaked away into the woods. The fallen leaves that covered it reflected the sun's golden light, making it look like some sort of yellow brick road. The temptation of new discovery outweighed any fuel concerns I had, and so I revved the engine and plunged deeper into the woods than I had ever been before. The trail itself was simply amazing. The foliage burst with a colorful radiance the likes of which I had never been privy to back in Connecticut. The crisp mountain air, which seemed ever abundant up here in Vermont, filled my lungs with an airiness that made me feel as if I could fly, and at times it seemed as if I was indeed flying as I whipped along those mountain trails. The trail itself was amazingly well kept, making it all too easy for me to forget myself and far exceed my normal self-imposed speed limit. The ground was clear aside from the leaves, and lacked even the occasional small branch or stone which normally littered trails such as these. There were a few times where a small stream carrying melt water down the side of the mountain crossed the trail, creating a small patch of mud, and a few loose stones. However, even those were few and far between. I was not sure exactly how long I had been on the trail for. I knew I had left the cabin at 9 a.m. However, since my watch had been broken the day before while piling wood and I was hesitant to bring my phone with me on the trails, I was unable to tell the time. A quick glance at the sky revealed the sun to be partly hidden by clouds. However, I was able to guess that it was around 12 o'clock when I ran out of gas. I had been zipping along the trails, and the serenity of the nature around me had caused my guard to lapse, and I had forgotten my worries about fuel. This combined with my increased speed is what led me to reach a sudden stuttering halt, as my vehicle sputtered, attempting to pull in whatever last remnants of fuel remained in the tank. My heart sank as I steered the four-wheeler to the side of the trail, stopping it amongst a bed of ferns directly next to a large maple tree, which stretched towards the sky with a stunning elegance that allowed me to, upon seeing it, momentarily forget my situation. My slight reprieve was short-lived, however, as I soon found myself fighting off panic as I glanced around, realizing that I had absolutely no clue where I was. The trees stretched on endlessly in every direction, and the trail that had seemed so set and certain while whizzing through it on the four-wheeler now appeared convoluted and confusing, as even a cursory glance over my shoulder revealed several offshoots and forks, among which any could have been the trail I had taken, as I had no idea. Knowing that panic would only cause me to make irrational decisions that could potentially make my situation worse, I closed my eyes, and took several deep breaths, attempting to bring my heart rate down, and stop my head from spinning. I did not waste my time with false reassurances, as I understood that I was not in a favorable situation. As I opened my eyes, I decided to make a quick accounting of the facts of my predicament in my head. I was in the mountain country of Vermont, which had in recent years become prime bear country. Up here in the mountains in mid-October, the temperature would plummet at night, going from 65 degrees in the sun during the day to well below freezing at night. The cabin where I had been staying was one of the last reaches of civilization in the area. It was on the outskirts of the small town of Chittenden in Vermont, and the property backed up to a massive area of national forest, which is where I now found myself. 10 years ago, these woods would have had hunters and four-wheelers all throughout. However, in recent years, as the families around here had aged and died and their children had moved off into the city, the woods had retaken most of the trails, and the family cabin was one of the last such outposts of humanity that was still inhabited this far away from Rutland, which was the biggest city in the local area. With these facts in mind, I realized that it would be in my best interest to get back to the cabin sooner rather than later, as being lost out there in the freezing cold with bears and who knows what else stalking about was not a tantalizing prospect to me. If I were to be attacked by any such beast, my only defense was my Swiss Army knife, which would probably do nothing more than to anger any Bruin that would already had to have been incensed in order for it to make the decision to attack. As far as the cold, I had flint and steel in the pocket of my leather jacket. However, glancing around, I realized that I would be hard-pressed to find wood dry enough to burn due to the saturation caused by the severe rainstorm that had swept the area for the past few days, only stopping earlier that morning. This all combined to create a feeling of dread that sat in my stomach like a lead weight, emanating throughout my body in the form of a cold chill that made my bones ice. Realizing that sitting on the four-wheeler reflecting on my problems was doing little to actually solve them, I decided to head out. But where would I go? I did not know how far I had traveled, and although I believed that it had been about 3 hours since I had left, that was purely conjecture based on the placement of the sun in the sky. Despite this, I knew that I had been traveling quite fast, along trails that often took turns and twists, and thus, even if I could find the right trail to take me back, it would certainly be much longer than the 5 hours that I had until sundown before I arrived at the cabin. Knowing this, I decided that the best course of action would be to determine the direction that I needed to head in, find my bearing using the sun, and run, making use of my cross-country experience to hopefully get me back before the sun set, and with it my best navigational tool. I knew that any direction that I headed in would allow me to reach an identifiable landmark. The National Forest land covered the top of the mountain. The area's western border was a massive Chittenden reservoir which supplied water to the city of Rutland and the surrounding areas. There were inhabited houses on the far side of the reservoir from where I stood, and our lake house sat amongst them. That was where I was supposed to be heading. I was going to spend the week there to give my parents some alone time at the cabin. However, that plan had been upended because the boat engine required to cross the reservoir sat on the now stalled four-wheeler, as it was the most expensive part of the boat, and thus not something that we left unattended for extended periods of time. The southern border was the pipe that brought the water from the reservoir and a subsequent access road that ran parallel to it, allowing for utility workers to service the pipes and ensure that they remained in good condition. This pipe ran about straight east to west before it intersected the eastern border, which was the mountain's lone actual road. By actual I mean one that was paved and wide enough for a car to drive on, in most places that is. The road ran north to south, up one side of the mountain to the other. The road was paved at the bottoms, and was traversable by car except for the portion on the top of the mountain, which had been badly damaged following a mudslide from one of the higher peaks. The mudslide had left a rather large creek that ran through a sizable indent in the land. This creek formed the northern boundary. The four boundaries together made up a massive area, several hundred square acres in size. Knowing this, I had only to decide which boundary I wanted to head for. The cabin itself was on the eastern road, about halfway up the mountain. This, however, did not mean that that was the best choice to head for. If I failed to reach the road before sundown, then I would be stuck wandering in the woods at night. However, if I could reach one of the other boundaries sooner, then although it would certainly take me until after dark to get back, I would at least be walking along marked trails. After pondering my precarious situation further, I decided that trail or no trail, I did not want to be walking through these freezing woods at night, and as such I decided to go for broke and head east towards the road. After using the sun to determine which way east was, I started running. It was somewhat eerie, running through the middle of the forest alone, especially since it had seemed to go so quiet after the storm earlier, but I didn't mind. I enjoyed nature, and I was more afraid of nighttime's freezing temperatures than of the actual creatures in the woods. Still, I couldn't help but feel a chill of fear creep up my spine whenever I saw movement out of the corner of my eyes. It happened rather often, just a fleeting glimpse of brown fur, dashing away before being hidden by the all-consuming underbrush. I suppose it should not have frightened me as much as it did, seeing as animals were naturally curious, however not typically prone to straying too far into someone's line of sight. I ran for a long time, however, darkness quickly began eating away at the edges of the golden daylight as the sun crept ever closer to the horizon. As the sunlight became increasingly feeble, I found myself forced to slow my pace in order to avoid tripping over something. I walked uneven as the moon rose high in the sky and the temperature began to plummet. I could feel it even through my leather jacket, a stabbing coldness that made my bones rattle with body-racking bouts of shivers. Even though I was tired, I knew I couldn't stop, as my persistent walking was probably the only thing maintaining my body heat. That and I had recently entered an area of woods which was thoroughly flooded, dashing any hopes I might have had to start a fire. The forest was incredibly dark, as it was lit only by the moon and stars, whose light had to fight its way down to me from the ever-thickening canopy above. It was because of this darkness that I began to stop seeing the shapes at the edges of my vision. However, this was not a reprieve from fear, for in the place of visual verification of their existence, I now had a quite chilling auditory one. I never actually heard them walking, there was no snapping of twigs or sloshing of mud, however they stayed ever present. Constantly just out of my eyesight yet always there. I know they were there because of the noises. They ranged from a low keening wail, like a hungry kit separated from its mother, to a low guttural cough-like sound. When I first began hearing them, I took off running, tripping and falling on my face several times, cutting my elbow once. However, it soon became apparent that running away was not an option, as the faster I went, the faster the noises followed, growing louder as I picked up speed, until I was in a full-out sprint, my ears filled with a blood-curdling scream. Tears began to fill my eyes, as I didn't want to die, and it was because of these tears that I failed to see the embankment fast approaching until it was too late, and I had already stepped out into the abyss, hanging in the air like a rag doll for a moment before gravity clenched me in its grasp and thrust me down to the ground below, and just like that, the sounds were gone. As I lay there on the forest floor some 30 feet below the ledge I had just jumped off of, I realized that the sounds were indeed gone. Silence filled the air, however even that did nothing but drive me further into frenzy, as the silence cut through my ears like razor blades, burning a hole in my brain with the sheer concept of nothingness which is utterly too much for the human brain to comprehend. As I lay there, I began hyperventilating, just simply wanting it to all stop, and it did, with a cough. I once again heard the noise, echoing through the wood like a gunshot, and with it, sound returned. Although still less than could normally be expected, I began to hear the creatures of the woodland, which, it occurred to me, I hadn't heard since the four-wheeler had stalled out. As I hiked through the woods, I began to get hungry. I realized that I hadn't eaten since that morning, and running around the woods like an idiot was not a good way to manage my caloric use. Despite the growing pain in my side, there was nothing I could do about it, except continue walking. I couldn't simply sit and wait for rescue, as I wasn't expected back at the cabin for around a week, and I did not want to try my hand seeing if I could play Bear Grylls and survive the week. I wanted to get home. The sun rose, and with it came the realization that I had been going in the completely wrong direction. Apparently during my bout of crazy the night before, I had managed to get myself hopelessly and utterly lost. Sighing deeply, however realizing there was nothing I could do about it, I adjusted my course and carried on, only to look up a couple of hours later to see that once again, I had strayed. Bewildered as to how this had happened to me in broad daylight, I nonetheless readjusted my course and carried on. This kept up for several days, during which time, despite my best efforts, I could just not seem to get my bearings. All this time, my hunger increased, growing into an intense burning pain in my stomach. I drank water from streams, but I could just not find food. As my hunger grew, so too did the presence of my friends. By my 6th day without food, my vision swam with brown matted fur, clumped with blood and hollow black eyes during the daytime, and my hearing shrieked with their voices at nighttime. I took to calling them my friends, because they began talking to me. They told me of where I could find abundant food, and feast until I was full. At first, I was repulsed. However, my aversion to the idea decreased as my hunger increased, until I reached the point where I clung to their words, just awaiting the time when I could make them prophetic. My chance came on my 7th day. I was walking through the woods when I heard the rattle of human voices ahead of me, 2 voices, one male and one female. I heard nothing as I crept closer to the clearing where they sat. I peered around a large oak tree, grinning as I saw a young couple in their 20s. I crept around the side of the tree, clenching my knife in hand, and I snuck closer. The man didn't hear me until it was too late. My knife already plunged deep in his chest, and the woman's scream was cut short by my teeth meeting in her throat, severing her windpipe. I will not disgust you with the details of that night. However, I left that clearing satisfied in many ways, and with no trace that they had ever been there. I was able to find the path that they had come along, and took it to the road that ran up the mountain. Upon reaching the road, I began to hike up, and within minutes, I stood at the driveway of the cabin. The sign on the mailbox read Judd's, and I grinned manically as I used my fingers to paint each letter a crimson red. Then, looking towards the cabin, and confirming that both vehicles were there, I began to walk down the driveway, humming along to whatever tune it was my friends were signing. It was something ancient and in a tongue I couldn't understand, and yet, I somehow knew the guttural ballad was about me. Walking slowly down the driveway, appreciating the beauty of the setting sun, I glanced quickly at the woodpile and I couldn't help but smirk as I wondered if anyone was buried below it. As I approached the front door, it occurred to me that I needed a new name. David Judd just didn't seem to fit the new me. The antiquity of such a name failed to express the vast wisdom I now contained, wisdom on the one true way to satiate hunger. As I pondered what my new name should be, I heard my friends once more, and smiling more than I ever had before, I realized that they were once again right. The name was perfect, something about it just felt right. Thus, as I opened the door, I tightened my grip on my knife, licked the dried blood from my lips, and before stepping inside, whispered so low, and so toneless that my voice could very well have been mistaken for the wind. I am Wendigo. 3rd story. This story was shared on r/Nosleep. Wendigo's Spirit, long-lost journal of a Viking explorer. Last year I was hiking with a buddy of mine in the woods in eastern Newfoundland. For those who don't know, it's in the far eastern part of Canada. We are both originally from the Vancouver and have been avid hikers and campers for many years, traveling to all parts of Canada and currently working on our visas to America actually. While we were on a 2-day hiking trip camping where we saw fit, we stumbled off path as we thought we saw a cave farther off into the distance. After about 3 to 4 minutes of walking off the dirt path into the woods, we approached it, and indeed it was a cave. Knowing that caves are super neat but also very dangerous for many reasons, we just looked around for a bit before deciding if we should check inside if it's clear or not, as it would make a good spot to have camp for the night. Caves are home to many animals ranging small to large, bears, wolves to name a couple of the more dangerous animals to be exact. We eventually grabbed our flashlights from our backpacks and entered the cave entrance cautiously. The cave was pitch black, and once we had walked inside, noticing how deep it actually was. From the outside it looked like a 6 to 7 foot wide opening with about a 5-foot ceiling. But once you stepped inside, it had a good open space. I'd guess to be about 15 by 15, which was more than enough space for the two of us to set up camp and get a fire going for the night. In the back of the space was what looked like a small pathway of some sort. It was narrow and looked like the earth cracked it just enough for someone to walk through it. Where it led we had no clue, and I was not really wanting to find out at that moment. We were tired, looking to rest, and did not feel like venturing off into the uncharted cave deeper and risking falling or getting hurt or stuck or God knows what else happens to people in caves. There was a faint water dripping noise down that dark pathway which echoed throughout the cave. Sounded spooky to me, but then again maybe there's some fresh water nearby we can collect for tomorrow hike, I told my buddy. Once we set up our things, I told him I'd go check it out and see if I could find the source of the water as I held out water containers in my now empty pack and my flashlight in my right hand. The pathway was twisted and narrow, and honestly it was just better that I went alone, plus I doubt my bud would have went with me anyways. He was tired as hell and was just ready to eat and go to sleep. I tucked and squeezed myself through with my pack and eventually found the source of the water after a minute or so walking deeper into the cave system. This cave kept going and going. I could not see further ahead, but I found the source, thankfully not too far in. There was a small stream that flowed down the rocky surface wall into a small puddle-like area, then disappearing into the rocks and earth. As I shone my flashlight around, I happened to come across a pouch of some sort which was made of animal fur. I thought it was an animal at first and stood frozen in my tracks. I walked over to the fur ball and grabbed it. I realized the fur was just wrapped around something flat and hard in its center. As I looked, it seemed to have unraveled an old as hell looking leather book of some sort. I was really memorized about the find, but then realized how thirsty I was and took care of filling up our water containers first and bring this book and fur back with me back to our little campsite at the cave entrance. Once I got back, my friend had already gotten the fire going, which felt really nice as I sat down handing him his water. The night was on its way out with the sun starting to set. I told my friend about the book and let him take a look at it. He was always the history buff anyways. I just liked video games and hot chicks. He told me that this journal looked really old and is really surprised it in the shape that it's in. He pointed to the off shapes that were on the cover and on parts of the pages on the inside. They looked like runes, he mentioned. I did not recall what runes were, and he told me that in fact that was the way of communication writing back in the Viking days. As he read, I mumbled to himself, "Dude, this is written in English, which is odd unless this person or Viking traveler was educated or had traveled more than most." He read on for a few minutes and told me to check it out as it mentioned this cave on one of the pages. He handed me the book and he laid back onto his mat and started to relax. I, on the other hand, was totally excited. Not only did I just find some ancient Viking journal in some cave in the middle of nowhere, but it was readable too. "This has to be worth some money," I said to him. He opened his eyes and just replied, "Dude, just read it or go to sleep." I smirked at him and I laid my back up against the side cave wall and started to read the notes from inside this journal. "If you are finding this journal, that means I am dead. My name is Bjorn Erling and the year is 1004 AD. I do not know the exact date of these entries as I have been stuck here in this cave for some time now. Our ship had arrived to the shores of this newfound land several weeks prior to these entries. There was 40 of us in total and have built a small village right off the shore past the wood line. We have an altercation with the natives of this land as they do not speak any language that I have heard before. They attacked our fort on the second week we are here. Several of our members have died and most of theirs too in the process. We can't seem to communicate properly with them and they keep attacking in the middle of the night and we're trying our best to improve our defenses. We have built walls around our village, but they always seem to find a way inside, picking us off one by one. They are not big people, quite small in fact, but there are many and our next ship is not due here for another week or more. I was out hunting with a brother of mine in these woods. We went deeper than we have been as our people are hungry and we needed meat. The sun was dim and the colors above were quite pleasant to see when it was visible from all the trees overhead. We started hearing noises echoing around us in the woods, not knowing what they were. We followed them. No sense at turning back, these sounds would have already startled off any catch we may have been tracking. As we continued deeper and deeper into the woods, the noises and snapping sounds became louder. We had no idea what was in store for us at the time, but we had to investigate. During our proustite, that when we both heard a familiar sounding voice speaking to us. It sounded like one of our other Viking brothers back at the village that had gone missing during one of the attacks for the natives. "Bjorn. Help me. They have me trapped here and I cannot escape." My brother screamed, "By Odin, where are you?" Silence. The voices did not reply. I gripped my sword handle on my waist and my brother held his bow with a firm grip. "Do you think that was really Kenjo?" "I don't know," I replied, "but we need to find out either way. It def sounded like him." We heard our brother speak again, but this time it spoke to use twice, but from different directions in front of us. "Levi, why did you not help me in the village? Hurry, I don't have much time." My brother Levi ran off to the left and motioned with his arm pointing for me to follow the other sound to the front right from our location. I nodded and readied my sword. After we had split up, I started to have a feeling of dread. An eerie feeling was washing over me. This felt off, none of this seemed right. The natives did not speak our language and that voice did sound like our brother Nook, but it was off in a way too. Not soon after, that's when I heard the screaming. The screaming of Levi. Rushing back in the direction I saw him walk to, I hurried as fast as I could. No longer caring about keeping the silence as I ran and screamed out to him trying to find his whereabouts. Further in the distance is when I saw it. I cannot even call it a man. It was some kind of forest creature. It was skinny like it was starting and shaped like a man from what I could muster. Its long arms clawed my friend, dragging his now lifeless body further into the dark woods. This creature had antlers on its head like some kind of deer. We have gods like this back home. Had they followed us here to this new land and now punishing us for becoming Christians? I was in total shock, but there was no choice in the matter and I was losing sight of them in the dark now, and there was a good distance still between us. I ran as fast as I could, but even in doing so still could not keep up with this creature dragging Levi. I picked up his bow off the grass along the chai and ended up finding this cave on this hillside. I just knew that creature had taken my brother into that cave. There was nowhere else in sight where it could have gone and disappeared to. Once in the cave, I explored as much as I could after making a makeshift torch with some fabric from my clothing on a nearby stick I had found. The space was tight. I found the bloody drag marks right away, so my hunch was correct. Levi was brought somewhere inside this cave system. I had gotten lost a couple of times within this cave. It is more than meets the eye, but always seem to find my way back to the water source as the constant dripping which echoes the labyrinth halls leads me back to here. I cannot leave him. I cannot leave my brother. I must avenge him and place his bow in his hand so that the Valkyries may take his soul to heaven or Valhalla to meet his family in paradise forevermore. I am writing this all down with the best of my knowledge in case I do not make it back out of this cave from which I ventured. Someone must know what happened to us. Someone must be let aware of this creature out in the woods. I hear my brother calling me now, far off, echoing off somewhere in this cave. I must end this log for now. If I return, I will update what I find. Goodbye for now. Fourth story. This story was shared by you/Sunday Panda, so credits to him. Wendigo. I grew up in the northernmost part of Wisconsin, on a Native American reservation. As a Native American kid, you grow up learning a lot about the mythology of our people, many mythical creatures and spirits, but I was always pretty skeptical, especially when it came to the monsters like Bigfoot, but all of that changed one day. It was mid-December and it was freezing out, had to be around -10 Fahrenheit. My friend David and I were at his family's house for a dinner. After the dinner was finished, his grandmother asked us if we would go to her cabin and chop some logs. She was going out there while her husband went hunting and she wanted it to be nice and warm. Of course we told her we would. What else could we do? So we throw on our jackets and boots and headed out. It wasn't too far, less than a mile if we went straight into the woods instead of walking the road, so that's what we did. Trekking through snow that is at times thigh-high isn't fun in the best of situations, but as I said, it was like -10. When we finally arrived, we went inside and started a fire with the few remaining split logs and warmed up a bit. The crackling flames were peaceful, but David kept pacing and looking around uneasily. I asked him what was wrong and he told me that he felt like he was being watched. I told him that was ridiculous and that we should start chopping wood before it got dark, so we got the axe and went outside and began to chop. We were doing that for about an hour when we first heard it, very faintly. It sounded like a girl screaming. We thought it must have been the wind, so we went back to the logs. A few more minutes went by and we heard it again. This time there was no mistaking it. A girl was yelling for help, then the wolf howled. We looked at each other and ran in the direction of the scream. We got to a spot where all the snow was packed down and there were paw prints all around. We began to yell for her, tried to get her to answer. That is when I heard the noise that haunts my dreams. The only way it can be described is an angry, hateful shriek, and it was close. David started running before me, but I caught up pretty quick. I was mentally kicking myself for leaving the axe back at the cabin, but that is where we were heading. Once we got back we would be fine, at least that's what I told myself. It didn't quite work out that way. Before we could get into the cabin, David fell. I turned to help him up, but he wasn't there, just a long drag mark. I yelled for him but got no response. I started moving in the direction of the mark when I got hit. I didn't see what hit me, but I sure felt it. I was knocked off my feet and my chest felt like it was on fire. I glanced down and saw my jacket was shredded and blood was everywhere. I couldn't breathe. I felt myself about to pass out. Then I saw it. It was tall, had to be about 9 feet, covered in thick, dirty white fur, a mouth full of fangs but no lips, clawed hands covered in blood, and its sunken eyes were pale yellow. I didn't know what it was, but it no longer mattered. I was losing blood quickly. How could I survive this? When I woke up I was in a hospital bed. My chest was bandaged and there was a police officer by my bed. When he saw that I was awake he asked me what happened. I told him everything. He told me that they found David's jacket and boots in the woods, but there was no sign of him. The doctor told me that I was attacked by a bear, and that I had hallucinated from blood loss. Eventually I recovered enough to be released. As far as I know they never found David and I haven't gone in the woods since that day. Well, that's my story. Enjoy! Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.